Hey, it's Coach Anderson here again, Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online U.S. History. Today we're going to talk a little bit about urban America from 1877 to present. So when we look at the United States of America today, what we're going to talk about is how we go from an agrarian society, which is a society, of course, that's based on farming, to more of an urban society, of course. So less rural, more urban. And we're going to talk about how this particular country of ours, of course, kind of starts to burst at the seams after the Civil War, especially in America's northeastern cities. So we're going to be looking at urban America from 1865 to 1896. And the first lesson we're going to talk about today is going to be immigration. So it's Unit 3, Lesson 1, and we'll begin by talking about our focus question. What is our focus question for this entire unit? It's going to be these two questions. So at the beginning of each one of these lessons, we'll go over these two focus questions, and we want you to keep these in mind as we go through, of course, these lessons. Because at the end of it, we'll have some type of culminating activity that will need you to be kind of familiar with these two questions, so of course that you can answer whatever that culminating activity would ask of you. The first question for unit focus on immigration is, why do people migrate? 2, why is urban life different from rural life? Or how is urban life different from rural life? And we'll talk about those things, of course, as we go. What we're going to do, of course, is start with a do now, like we always do. If you will, take out your journals that we've asked you to do before, write down the do now activity, and we want you to write down the question. This is, why do you think immigration is such a hot issue in the United States of America today? So we'll give you a few moments, and then we'll come back in a few seconds, and we'll talk about what some possible answers, of course, that you could put regarding that particular prompt. Okay, you should have had enough time, of course, that you you probably were in a position where you could write down a whole lot of things in terms of why it is that immigration is such a hot issue in the United States of America today. But what we're going to do is try to give you a little bit of insight, of course, but there's not really any right or wrong answer here, because your opinion is your opinion. But in looking at most Americans look at the economic issues that come with immigration. So if immigrants come here, you have to provide them, of course, with the way, of course, of being able to survive in this particular country. Then in some cases, that means social welfare programs, of course, that are extended to them. In addition to that, a lot of people throughout our not just today, but throughout our history have looked at immigrants coming in the country and see them, of course, as taking away jobs, of course, and taking away jobs, of course, from American citizens that are always here. And then they talk about violence, of course, as being one of the things that's associated with immigration. So it's any number of different things. And what we want you to do is understand that the same issues, of course, that we have today, we'll make that connection for you. The same issues that we have today are some of the very same issues that they had in the 1800s and the early 1900s. So we'll go ahead and begin by looking at our vocabulary. Once again, we'll try to point out these vocabulary words as we go through. Our academic vocabulary includes words like ethnic, quarantine, deportation. Content vocabulary would include immigrant, steerage, and nativism. And what we'll try to do, of course, is that when we come across these words in the lesson, we'll try to pause for a second or two and make sure that we give you an explanation of what, of course, they mean in context. Guided reading questions. In this particular lesson, there are 2 guided reading questions that we want to make sure that we are thinking about as we go through the lesson on immigration today. Number 1, how did immigrants of the late 1800s change American society? 2, why did nativists oppose immigration? So as we go through the lesson on immigration today, lesson 1 on immigration today, think about these 2 questions. And once again, take your journals out, and it'd be a good idea, of course, for you to write these 2 particular questions down. And as we go through, take a few notes, and we will move on from there. And we'll, at the end of the lesson, of course, go over those 2 questions. All right, first thing we want to talk about is immigrants flood into America. Between the end of the Civil War in 1865 and the start of World War I in 1914, more than 25 million immigrants came to the United States of America. The vast majority of them came from Europe, about 24 million or so, and they came in steerage. Now, if you've ever seen Titanic, you notice, of course, Rose's character, of course, was in the upper berths on the ship, of course, and she was in that high class accommodation And then if you think about DiCaprio's character, his accommodation, of course, was down in the bottom or the belly of the boat in terms of what it was steerage. And steerage was these huge open areas beneath the decks of the boat, and that's where the vast majority of American immigrants came to this country. European immigrants came to this country. They came in the belly of these boats in steerage. And then you look at it, we said 25 million immigrants came, 24 million of them came from Europe. Another million or so came from Asia. We're going to look at, about 450,000 or so came from Asia in the form of the Chinese and the Japanese. And we're going to find that a lot of Canadians will cross the border and come south. So we're looking at, when we look at immigration, we're talking about basically the country, of course, kind of doubles in size in a span of less than 50 years or so. The first wave from 1865 to 1895 of European immigration was from northern and western European countries like England, Scotland, Ireland, and Germany. We're going to find that there's going to be a shift in immigration a little bit later, and we're going to find that the attitudes of Americans is going to change about immigration when it shifts to that second wave of immigration, and we'll talk about why that is in a few minutes. Where did they come from? Well, if you look at it, the vast majority of them, of course, you'll see came from Great Britain and Ireland here. You had 3 million or so that came from Russia. You had 1,950,000, of course, that came from Scandinavia. That would be countries like Finland, Norway, Sweden. So we're going to be looking at a lot of these Western Europeans, of course, coming in. And a little bit later, we're going to start seeing more and more immigration that's going to occur with them coming in from Southern and Eastern Europe. European immigration motivation. So why did people move? And we've talked about this before. There's usually a pull factor or a push factor that causes people to move. A push factor is something where you live that makes you want to leave. And a pull factor is something in a place that makes you want to come to it. And looking at push factors, in Europe, the reason why a lot of Europeans wanted to come to America is because of some of these push factors we see here. Number one, political tyranny. In other words, they didn't feel like they felt like their government, of course, was coming down on them and not giving them say or not giving them any kind of input. Number one. Number two, there was a shortage of land. Most of the wealthy people of Europe, especially in places like Ireland, they controlled the land and owned the land. And if you were a person that was in need of land, the likelihood of you gaining access to some was pretty unlikely. Religious oppression, overpopulation, failed crops. If you were the Irish, it was the potato blight. And when in the 1840s, and we're going to find the 1840s, 1850s, a lot of Irish people, of course, will come to this country. Poverty, compulsory draft service. You had to join, or at least open yourself, of course, to fighting these European wars. Pull factors. What things in America made people want to come here? Well, when you think about it, there was an abundance of free land. We talked about the Homestead Act before. We talked about the railroad companies giving away and selling land, of course, to people that settled on the railroad tracks. There was a higher standard of living in this particular country. My God, you're making 22 cents an hour, working 60 hours a week. So who wouldn't want that? Democracy. There were no kings and queens. There was social advancement. A person could actually, in this country, work hard, keep their nose down, keep their head down, work hard, keep their nose to the grindstone, and actually become wealthy. When you think about Andrew Carnegie is one of the wealthiest men, of course, in the country. He becomes one of the wealthiest men in the country, and he was a Scottish immigrant. Alexander Graham Bell, who becomes one of the innovators and inventors, of course, of the telephone. A Scot that comes here and establishes Bell Telephone, AT&T. So when you think about what pull factors in this particular country were, I would dare say that they were more attractive to a lot of the immigrants more so than some of the things that were pushing them out. The pioneer spirit. If you were a person that didn't mind, a little excitement in your life, and you wanted excitement, this is the place to be, especially if you were coming to this country and you were moving to the American West that had been glamorized so, and you were hearing about it. And then opportunity. There were opportunities in this country, a lot more opportunities here than it was in the old country of Europe. And then those 3 G's once again. gold, God, and glory. Because my goodness, in the United States of America, people were tripping over gold, at least so they thought. And then of course, glory once again, and then God. You can worship whatever way you wanted, and in this particular country would be accepting of that. Where did these European immigrants come into the country at? They came to the country, of course, at a place called Ellis Island, located in New York, off the coast of New York City. And it was an interest point for people entering from Europe, and upon arrival, the immigrants were quickly processed, placed in on entrance rolls, and given medical exams. Failed medicals in some cases could mean that you were quarantined or you were set aside and you were isolated from everyone else till you either got better or you could possibly be deported back to Europe. Once again, two of those vocabulary words.